Sifter for the ear.
News, interviews, reviews, cinema, TV, streaming. Action!
Hi y'all, this is Jerry Williams, aka TV Jerry. Happy New Year, which also marks the start of the 4th year of Sifter for the Ear. There are more than 150 shows so far, with everyone from stunt performers to union reps to location scouts and, of course, movie stars. Next week is a special meta surprise.
Moses Jacob Ezekiel was considered the most important Jewish American artist of his time, yet so few people know about him.
Moses was the first prominent Jewish sculptor in America, but it would not be a great loss if his Confederate statues were demolished.
That was an excerpt from the trailer for today's film, Moses Ezekiel, A Portrait of a Lost Artist, which will screen at this year's Israeli and Jewish Film Festival. This marks the 16th anniversary for the festival, which is sponsored by the Weinstein Jewish Community Center and features foreign imports from Israel, plus films with a Jewish theme from around the world. It'll run from January 7th through 26th with screenings at the Weinstein JCC, the Byrd Theater, the VMFA, the University of Richmond's Jepson Alumni Center, and the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, where this week's podcast Spotlight film will screen. Moses Ezekiel, A Portrait of a Lost Artist, is about a Richmond native who became a world-celebrated sculptor with statues that included Civil War monuments. It'll show Sunday, January 19th, 2 p.m. at the Museum of History and Culture. And I'll have a link on the webpage for this show at tvjerry.com. Other films will include We Will Dance Again, about the October 7th attack on Israel that disrupted an EDM music festival. All About the Levkoviches, an Hungarian import about a family's reconciliation. Israel Swings for the Gold follows the country's first baseball team to the 2021 games, plus more. Directors and other participants will be present at the screenings for Q&A. I'll have a link to the whole festival on the webpage for the show at tvjerry.com. Speaking of the festival, you may have heard my last interview with Stephen Pressman about his earlier doc, The Levees of Monticello, which was featured when it played at the Israeli and Jewish Festival in 2023. His doc for this year is Moses Ezekiel, A Portrait of a Lost Artist, and we'll talk about this little-known Richmonder and how Stephen made the movie.
Sifter Review of the Week.
No Good Deed on Netflix. Lisa Kudrow and Ray Romano play a couple trying to sell their beloved Los Angeles home. Meanwhile, there are 3 couples vying to buy the property, while the owners attempt to conceal a secret about something that happened there. With that duo in the lead and other comic actors like Dennis Leary, Linda Cardinelli, and Luke Wilson, you'd expect the comedy to run rampant. Alas, there are few punchlines and even fewer genuine laughs. The entire cast does a fine job, including the heartfelt emotional moments, which sometimes get in the way. Series showrunner Liz Feldman is best known for her series Dead to Me, which was clever and funny. Like that show, this one ends every episode with a twist, and the theme trades in darkness. While this series provides some snappy moments and the regular surprises, it's more dark and personal than outright comedy. I gave No Good Deed 3 out of 5 stars. Stephen Pressman, welcome back to Sifter for the Ear. It's been a couple of years.
Jerry, it's a pleasure to be back on the air with you.
This time we're talking about Moses Ezekiel, A Portrait of the Lost Artist. But of course, I got to go back and ask you, first off, how did things turn out with Levees of Monticello?
Oh, Jerry, we had a great run with that film. I'm very proud and a little humbled to say that the Monticello film ended up playing at over 100 film festivals around the country. And about a year or so ago, it went on some of the streaming platforms, Amazon Prime and others. Very pleased and very proud of that film.
Terrific. Congratulations. Yeah, it was great. And I have many times told people, by the way, did you know for almost 90 years a Jewish family owned Monticello? And they're like, really? So it's a fascinating story. And this is a fascinating story. How did you hear about Moses Ezekiel?
The somewhat odd thing about Mr. Ezekiel is that I first came to know about him actually when I was making the Monticello film. At the very end of the Monticello film, there's a reference to the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists who marched in the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia back in 2017. We have a scene in that film where all these folks are with their torchlights and whatever, surrounding a statue of their hero, Thomas Jefferson, shouting, "The Jews will not replace us." And the film makes the point, as I discovered when I was making that film, that statue of Thomas Jefferson was created by this Jewish artist named Moses Ezekiel.
Right, right.
I have to tell you, Jerry, that until I was working on that film, I quite honestly had never heard of Moses Ezekiel. I had
Right.
no idea who he was. I have to tell you, I got so excited when I learned about him, and I sort of tucked in the back of my head the idea of maybe coming back and doing a film about him. Here's a fascinating Jewish character, a historical character, a very successful artist in his time, but somebody who wound up doing some rather controversial works of art connected to the Civil War. But the point for me as a filmmaker was that I guess I came to realize that his story kind of had all the elements of what I hope would make for a pretty interesting documentary film.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. And one of the things, of course, you discussed at the beginning, some Jews owned slaves in the United States, which I did not realize. And he was actually involved in supporting the South during the Civil War, which was kind of a shock to me. Sure, it was to you, too.
It sure was. It's a funny thing because we sometimes think about the history of Jews in America, and our mind doesn't go to places like the Civil War, with
Right.
one or two exceptions. But as you mentioned, there were Jewish slaveholders. There were Jews who were involved in the slave trade. And it's a somewhat uncomfortable and disturbing part, really, of American history and in particular American Jewish history. And Moses Ezekiel and his family really fits, unfortunately, into that part of history. Moses was born in Richmond, Virginia.
Right.
One of the interesting things that I learned about him, which is mentioned in the film, is that the Civil War comes along, and not only is Moses Ezekiel determined to do his part in support of the Confederacy, but he becomes the first Jewish cadet to enroll at the Virginia Military Institute.
Footnote.
The Virginia Military Institute, aka VMI, is a public military college in Lexington, Virginia. It was founded in 1839.
There's a young 18, 19-year-old Moses Ezekiel as a cadet studying at VMI and preparing and hoping to get into battle in the Civil War in support of the Confederacy.
Surprise guest drop-in.
Ironically, you say that because, as you know, I like to have a surprise drop-in guest. And unfortunately, Leslie from the JCC was not available today, so I found somebody else. Colonel Gibson?
All right.
Well, it's good to be with you.
Footnote.
Colonel Keith Gibson is a former graduate of VMI and the director of their museums. Guess I don't have to introduce you guys. You know each other already, right?
Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Colonel Gibson.
It's ironic. He was just talking about him being at VMI, and I said, well, you timed it perfectly because here he is to talk about it. So how did you first hear about him? I'm sure it was long before Steve got a hold of you and said, hey, come be in my movie. How did you first hear about Moses Ezekiel?
It happened when I was a cadet. Any typical cadet probably is going to know more about his college than a typical college student beyond, the football scores.
Right.
But the history, the origins of the school, because of its distinctive nature. And a part of that story is the Battle of Newmarket in 1864 and the 10 cadets that were killed there. And those cadets, 6 of them are actually buried on the grounds of VMI. And there, literally casting a shadow over those 6 graves, is a statue known as Virginia Mourning Her Dead. It is the first major, I'll say, self-commissioned work that Ezekiel did in 1869. So he creates this allegorical figure of Virginia, the Commonwealth, mourning her dead of war. And I passed by that monument more times than I care to count. Really, when I was still a cadet, I become interested and learn a bit about Ezekiel. Of course, that's matured over the years with my own work in Ezekiel, publishing a biography on him I want to say 15 years ago. I hope it wasn't longer ago than that. Time tends to get away from us.
Well, I have to ask you, because you mentioned this battle several times, and obviously Steve mentions it in the movie. The battlefield is called the Field of Lost Shoes because it was so muddy that the soldiers actually lost their shoes. And there was a narrative version of the movie that was made out of Richmond a couple of years ago, well, quite a few years ago now, and I believe there was another version that you've mentioned.
That's right. 15 years ago, we did a PBS docudrama on the life of the cadets in the Battle of Newmarket. And that, in fact, was an Emmy Award-winning film, and it's become now a 45-minute version of it becomes our orientation film at the Virginia Museum of the Civil War.
Let me just jump in here. For me as a filmmaker, one of the great joys of making documentaries is meeting and having the chance to sit down with people like Colonel Gibson and others who are the experts. I'm just the guy standing behind the camera telling my cinematographer to hit the start button.
Right.
And then I rely on the experts to tell the story. Even to step foot on a place like VMI, a place I had never been to before, it makes history come alive. I just want to thank you, Keith, for being part of the project.
Colonel Gibson, I want to thank you so much for dropping in. It was great to see you in the documentary and to get the chance to chat with you in person.
I very much appreciate the opportunity, Jerry. And Steve, look forward to seeing you down in Richmond after the turn of the year and seeing the film on the big screen.
Great. I'm glad you're going to be here for that, too. Thank you so much.
Happy holidays, Keith.
Thanks. Same to you.
What did you do for research? Because I don't think, other than that book you mentioned, there wasn't, like you found before, there was a lot of research on the levees, but you didn't really have a central place to go to. There's no Ezekiel Moses Foundation or anything, is there?
No, there isn't. But there are people out there who know a lot about Moses Ezekiel, even though in his day was internationally famous. He was a rock star in the world of art around the world, in Europe and elsewhere. And today he's almost lost to history. And so again, for me, it's always fun to kind of rediscover some of these lost stories. And he certainly fit into that category.
Robert E. Lee and Ulysses Grant figured into his life. That's kind of crazy because that's both sides of the Civil War, obviously.
Absolutely. Look, there's no escaping the fact. And one of the reasons that I wanted to make this film is that, and one of the reasons why I think at least it kind of resonates with some issues that we're still grappling with today as a country, is that Ezekiel never apologized for having supported and participated in the Civil War on the side of the Confederacy. He was a loyal son of the South. His family had a connection to the horrible institution of slavery. His grandfather, who helped to raise him, was a merchant in Richmond who owned a tailor shop that would clothe the enslaved folks who were going up for auction. So there's no escaping that part of Moses Ezekiel's story. That really, Jerry, is what informs his feelings of love and support for people like Robert E. Lee. He venerated those people. He thought they were the heroes of his time and his day. And Ezekiel always lamented the fact that he never had an opportunity to create one of these heroic monuments to Robert E. Lee. Now, the ultimate irony there is, of course, that it was precisely those kinds of monuments that in the last 5, 10, 15 years have largely been removed from the public spaces, including right there in Richmond, Virginia, along Monuments Avenue.
Speaking of Virginia, he did have one other statue here, which you cover at the end of it, and you do beautifully handle the controversy of that statue at the National Cemetery.
Perhaps the crowning achievement, and I use that word crowning advisedly because Moses Ezekiel saw it as his crowning achievement, was the commission he got toward the end of his life, only a few years before he passed away, in the beginning of the 20th century. He gets a commission from the United Daughters of the Confederacy to create a huge public monument to honor the Confederacy that was to be erected at Arlington National Cemetery, this venerated, hallowed ground that we all know of today, to be located in a Confederate burial section. And I have to tell you, just as a quick aside, until I made this film, I had no idea that there were Confederate soldiers buried at Arlington National Cemetery.
Neither did I.
But they've been there for decades. And Ezekiel was proud and honored to get that commission to create this towering monument to the Confederacy, which all these decades later was among those that was the subject of great debate for many years over whether or not it should remain in place at Arlington. And just from an almost accidental timing point of view, just as I was very near the completion of the film, we got the word that that statue was coming down. And we were just able to squeeze it into the
Say, run back out with your camera, quick.
Exactly. It was at the 11th hour, and in many ways, I think it's a fitting culmination not only to the film but to the story of Moses Ezekiel, because the debate over what happens or what should happen to those Confederate memorials around the country again is part of a larger debate that we're still dealing with in this country, how to deal with things like the history of the Civil War. And it turns out that Moses Ezekiel was a great character to use to tell that part of the story.
That's interesting because obviously he was Southern, and the voiceover is a Southern accent. Well, I'm assuming that was intentional?
Neither I nor anybody, I think, knows what Moses Ezekiel actually sounded like. To the best of my knowledge, and I think I ran this past people like Colonel Gibson and Samantha Baskin and others in the film, was there any sort of historical evidence, even sound recordings? I mean, look, right. Moses Ezekiel doesn't pass away until World War I, until 1917. So it's conceivable that there could have been audio.
A wax cylinder or something, yeah.
Exactly. None that we know of. So when I worked with my actor, a fabulous voiceover actor named John Lisco, lives right here in Washington, D.C., we talked about, what kind of voice we wanted. I suppose I could be accused of taking a little bit of dramatic license because I don't know what Moses Ezekiel would have sounded like. All I know is that he was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. And so we came up with this voice that is evocative of a Southern accent, but also knowing and keeping in mind that Moses was a guy who spent 40 years living in Rome, Italy. And so we also wanted a sort of almost imperious European kind of international eccentric voice. And I think John really hit the nail on the head when he kind of infused a little bit of a Southern accent with that sort of broader international voice. But truth be told, we're making it up.
Well, and talk about eccentric, this was a fact that almost doesn't come in till late into the film, and I was kind of surprised. He was out, he was gay, which at that time was kind of course, he was in Rome, so it was a lot easier.
Exactly.
But how much research was, because I can't imagine there was a whole lot of documentation about that because it was forbidden at the time.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right, Jerry. Well, let me think about how best to phrase this, because I will tell you in all candor that not everybody is 100% confident about identifying Moses Ezekiel as having been gay. I didn't make it up. He never publicly outed himself because that just wasn't done back then. Even in a free and liberal place like Rome, Italy, as opposed to Cincinnati, Ohio, which is where his family had moved to, attitudes were much more open and tolerant in a place like Rome, but it still wasn't the era for really anybody to come out publicly. All I can say for sure is that in his memoirs, which I took full advantage of, they're widely available. You can even find them online. He talks very candidly about who he calls his special friend, his close friend, a fellow artist who's mentioned in the film, a German artist by the name of Fedor Enke. I and others do a little reading between the lines and knowing a bit about Moses Ezekiel's life.
How's your gaydar is what I'm trying to say here, Steve.
I'd like to think that it's pretty good. But again, I will candidly tell you that not everybody is certainly 100% sure. But my instincts tell me that he was. But I will tell you as well, Jerry, that certainly I didn't want to make a big deal out of it one way or another.
Right.
So there's basically a kind of a passing reference. There is a reference to his companion, Fedor Enke. They traveled together. But ultimately, his sexual orientation is sort of neither here nor there, I think, in terms of the broader story of his life. But I didn't want to ignore the fact or the likely fact that this prominent artist also happened to be gay.
Right. Now, there's a wonderful line. It's actually the last line, if not the last line, one of the last lines in the film. Don't forget, but don't celebrate his work.
I love that line. I love that line that comes from one of the experts in the film. And I think it's a wonderful way to really sum up how a lot of people, myself included, look today at an artist like Moses Ezekiel. And again, particularly in the context of the controversy over things like his Civil War, his Confederate memorials. And the point being that we can celebrate an artist for his artistic achievements. And we don't want to forget about these people who, again, in the case of somebody like Moses Ezekiel, really has almost been lost to history, but nor do we want to celebrate the more disturbing parts of their legacies. Moses Ezekiel created lots and lots of gorgeous pieces of art having nothing to do with the Civil War. In fact, as Colonel Gibson himself mentions in the film, really only a tiny number of works of art that Moses created had anything to do with the Civil War. But the point being that he did create those controversial works, and perhaps 120, 130, 140 years after the Civil War, perhaps we shouldn't be celebrating that part of this artist's legacy, but nor should we be forgetting the artistry and the man himself.
You may or may not remember from the last time we talked, I always ask, what are you watching? And your first response was Slow Horses, which I didn't like then. It's now in its 4th season and everybody's raving about it. I still couldn't get into it. Are you caught up on it?
Oh, I got to tell you, not only am I still in love with Slow Horses, but after every season where I finish sort of binging through the 7 or 8 episodes, I go into a state of mourning because I know it's going to be another year before I get back to it. But right now, I'm equally enamored of The Agency, which is an American remake of a French series from a few years ago called Le Bureau.
Right.
It's a CIA thriller. It's set in London.
I wouldn't go thriller. I'm only 3 episodes in, but again, it's another one of these slow psychological things. There's not a lot of action. Like Day of the Jackal on Peacock. Have you seen that with Eddie Redmayne?
I've not yet watched Jackal. I've heard good things about it.
It's great. It's a classic old school thriller with killing and violence and all the good stuff.
I got to tell you, on the other hand, on the more sitcom-y side of things, not a sitcom, but great writing, laughs, as well as great pathos. I'm a huge fan of Shrinking.
I was going to say, I bet you're going to say Shrinking. Absolutely.
I love, and I got to tell you, Jerry, I think the second season is even better than the first, just because it's, on the surface, it's, you can laugh, there's great writing, but you dig beneath the surface, there's a whole lot going on in that show.
Yeah.
And I think the second season is just fabulous.
We just watched it, the last episode last night, and Jason Segel's final scene on that park bench was, wow, devastating.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I'm really surprised and shocked that Harrison Ford didn't get an Emmy nomination last season for that, because he's hilarious in this.
He is so good. He is so good. I think everybody's good in it. I think the writing is just beyond perfection.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites, too. I'm glad we can agree on that one. That's a good way to sign off here.
Very good, Jerry.
Well, Steve, I hope I'll get to see you when you come to Richmond, and hopefully we'll get to talk again in another 2 years. Have you got another one on the back burner already?
Full in production mode, a year or so away from finishing it. The little tease is it's a Jewish story about Woody Guthrie.
Oh, wow. Cool. Okay. Good deal.
That's all I'll say.
There you go. Well, that'll be kind of timely considering there's a big movie coming out on Christmas Day about a very famous Jewish singer. So that'll be interesting to see how that works out, too. All right, Steve, I want to thank you again. It was great to talk to you again, and good luck with this documentary. It's fascinating and, as usual, informative, and I look forward to seeing you in Richmond and beyond.
A pleasure, Jerry.
That was director Stephen Pressman talking about his latest documentary, Moses Ezekiel, A Portrait of a Lost Artist, which is about a little-known Richmond sculptor. It will screen at this year's Israeli and Jewish Film Festival. There'll be links to the festival, the trailer, and the other things we've discussed in this interview on the webpage for the show at tvjerry.com.
Coming soon. In theaters.
Because everything opened in the middle of last week, there are no new films opening this weekend.
TV and streaming.
Conch on Life on Netflix. This is a follow-up to the series Conch on Earth, which is a hilarious send-up on documentaries. Going Dutch on Fox and Hulu. Dennis Leary stars as an outspoken Army colonel, would there be any other kind with Leary, who is punished by being reassigned to an unimportant base in the Netherlands. Lockerbie, The Search for Truth on Peacock. This is the first of 2 projects about the 1988 bombing of a Pan Am flight over Scotland. It stars Colin Firth. The other one is coming out on Netflix. Shifting Gears on Hulu and ABC. This is the latest comedy starring Tim Allen as the widowed owner of a classic car restoration shop who finds his daughter and teen grandchildren moving in with him. RuPaul Drag Race on MTV enters its latest season. Nikki Glazer hosts the 82nd Annual Golden Globes on CBS and Paramount+. Next week, we celebrate the launch of my 4th year with a meta gimmick. Local cinematographer Bunt Young is known for his voice impressions of others in the production community, and yours truly is one of them. So he will be on the podcast as me, interviewing me. We'll discuss my long career as a director and lots more, including plenty of laughs. By the way, you can subscribe to this podcast on the usual platforms or go to TV Jerry, click on the podcast tab, and there's a link to enroll. This is Jerry Williams. Thanks for listening.
For more Sister, including literally thousands of reviews,
Visit tvjerry.com.
That's a wrap.